Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Safety Spotlight podcast. Just a heads up for this episode, the audio on my end was just a little bit off. Beforehand, I was playing around with the gain knob on this new microphone that we have, and I turned it up a little bit too high. That's my bad. Nicole Wetsch was phenomenal. There's a ton of actionable insights here for safety professionals. Just wanted to give everyone a heads up on the audio beforehand. We did our best to correct it, so hope you enjoy the episode.
And so once you kind of have that, that reputation of, this person's really connected and they understand, right, that it's not always the big things, it's the little things.
Nicole Wetsch, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you. You've had an outstanding career over more than 30 years in the safety profession,
Yes.
multiple organizations in different sectors, and in 2021 nominated the top woman in safety, which is that's a pretty incredible achievement. I would love to give the background for you, but I think the person most qualified to do that would be yourself. So if you can just give us a quick rundown of who you are, your history, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I am Canadian. I now live in the US, but I started my career in Canada. And I entered into sort of the field of safety and risk management in a very non-traditional way. I think I graduated with a degree in criminology and really thought that I was going to be a lawyer. But after 4 years, I kind of made my way out and I worked a little bit in corrections. And then I actually transitioned to work for the WSIB system in Ontario, Canada. And so that was really kind of my beginning of kind of getting introduced to this whole world of safety and more on the reactive side of safety, right? So what happens when a workplace accident happens? How do we rehabilitate injured employees and get them back to where they needed to be? And so, very interested in that. And then I kind of flipped over to the private sector and started working more in loss control, security, risk management. And I think that's where, for me, the biggest, opportunity I had was to really kind of start in risk management and really understanding, the cost of safety and when an organization isn't safe or has risks that they're not mitigating, what happens in those circumstances. And so then having that perspective and then being able to sort of shift to, well, how do we actually get on the front end of that? And how do we really, start from a prevention standpoint and then, obviously, really create a business case for safety, because obviously when safety goes wrong in an organization, it costs everyone. It costs the employee, it costs the employer, the productivity suffers. There are so many business imperatives to, why safety is a paramount piece to an organization's success. And so being able to really kind of understand the impacts of, when safety goes wrong and being able to turn that around and demonstrate to organizations how you can invest proactively in safety, training, all of those elements to make competent workforce and mitigate risk in your organization, you can actually become a productivity center for the organization. So
Okay,
that to me
interesting.
has kind of created my passion around safety, because I can really be a strong business partner in the safety function, to my peers in operations or other parts, HR, all the other, aspects where safety kind of, partners with the organization's other functions. And I can really contribute to the bottom line. But while doing that, I can contribute to having healthy, happy, well-trained, competent workers. It's kind of like everybody wins. So, for me, that's the fire that lights me. It gets me out of bed every day, just to be able to have such a tremendous impact. And I don't know that, other departments in a company can say that they can have that much impact across all dimensions of the organization.
Well, it's a great place to start. And, I've heard this from so many different, leaders in the safety space. It's, there can be some frustration in that, leaders of an organization might not realize just how much having a safe, happy workplace environment can really contribute to, like you mentioned, productivity. What are some of I guess, when you're coming into an organization, the first thing is that you're looking at to really identify where some of those gaps might be when you're just coming into an organization. Because I think, you know, it can be, without having outside perspective looking in, people might not even notice what they're missing out in their organization.
Yeah, I think it's really starting at every layer of the organization, right? With the front line and the frontline employees, the frontline supervisors, that's kind of what is called the working interface. And that is where the culture exists, where the culture starts. And so, that's kind of what I feel is kind of a demonstration of the outcome of what leadership is doing or not doing. And so really kind of going in and understanding those interactions, what is the level of training, what is the level of competency at those levels, how are we performing? So what are the results of our operation from a lagging indicator, accident rates, all of those things. And then kind of then following that back up through, the food chain to see, okay, where are the gaps? And where do we see, things that are just disconnecting between where, the top leadership is saying safety is, our number one priority, which I don't believe is really the right statement. It's a core value. It's part of everything we do. It's not what we do. It's how we do it and how we weave that. And so it's just that disconnect and understanding, if this is the belief of management, then where are the gaps in getting that down to the front line, and why isn't the front line seeing that? So, traditionally I would start with a culture perception survey to really get every level of management's insights into what they feel is what's positive about the culture, what's not, what are the perceptions of the culture. And that's been, a model I've used in several organizations, and it creates your roadmap to, okay, we have, it's not, safety isn't compliance, that's, kind of old school mentality is that, we have a rule book and we follow it. It's really about safety is about the culture that drives, right, the results, and compliance is a component of that, but it's not what's going to change, right? It's not going to change the needle. And so when we look at really kind of understanding the perceptions and then putting a strategy, to that outcome of what that survey told us, and then just being able to engage all stakeholders in the process is the way you're going to be able to affect it. And so that's kind of what I've done, whether I've done it formally through a survey or just pulse checks. And you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a huge investment. You can definitely do it kind of on the on the inexpensive side by having round tables and doing that, or you could use a professional company to come in and do a true survey. When you have that roadmap, then you have a baseline, and it can tell you, and it can be the measurement of where you are and where you want to go, and then how successful were you in your strategy. And that's a really important component, I think, for any safety professional, is to be able to show that return on investment, to be able to measure outcomes and be able to demonstrate that, here's kind of what we were focused on, here's the strategy we applied, and here's the result. And when you are able to do that, you build credibility and trust in the organization very quickly, and then it becomes quicker for you to be able to execute change. So they become more confident in you as a leader, saying, okay, this leader understands, right, how to go from strategy, execution to result. And so the speed at which you can drive change in an organization and achieve results becomes quicker. But you really have to start with building your own credibility as a leader and making sure that you're building those relationships to influence others. So, talking to a CFO, that conversation might be very different than talking to the CHRO, because they come from different places in terms of what they're there to achieve in the organization. And so I'm very, vocal with my team, is that we have to meet leaders where they're at. We can have expectations of the way they should be or how they should act or what they should hold important. And it's our job to influence them to understand how safety needs to be part of that. But you have to meet them where they're at, and you have to give them that what's in it for me, and be able to demonstrate to them through their lens of how safety can help them achieve their goals. And
Right.
that's kind of how you get the engagement at all levels.
So what I'm hearing is there's no silver bullet to this,
No,
really.
unfortunately.
Unfortunately not. Which makes it a puzzle to solve, but one that's really important. And the culture perception survey, I'm curious, how often when you go in and you conduct these surveys, is there a major disconnect between the different departments? I'd imagine probably happens quite a lot. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, you will see differences like what employees hold as important, right, versus leadership. So you'll see discrepancies or leaders perceiving that, well, I'm out in the business, we start every safety call with a safety message. We do this, and this was an example in an organization that I worked in where, leadership was saying all the right things. We had all the core process in place where every meeting started with safety. We had good KPIs. We had all of these things, but leadership wasn't in the field with operations. They were behind their desk. And so what we heard from the employees was even though leadership is saying it's important, we're not seeing them, right, execute on that. And we're not seeing them, really walk a mile in our shoes to understand the challenges we're having. And so that was an example in a past organization that was loud and clear. We needed to better engage our leaders and we needed to better engage our employees, right, in owning and being personally responsible for safety, their safety of their brother, sister, keeper. And so when we applied that, that learning from that survey, we developed an engagement program, which at first it was we had to tell leaders that they had to go to the field once a quarter for a full day and only talk about safety and only, right, address, and they couldn't discipline, that they just had to correct, that they had to have conversations, they had to remove, obstacles, and it had to be a very positive process for the employees. And so, we did that. And it was at first, it was like, okay, we need to check the box that everybody did their visits.
Like
Fast forward,
pulling teeth a little bit,
right. And,
probably.
and holding people accountable, right? So
Yeah.
driving to like, we're going to measure this to make sure everybody's doing it. Fast forward a couple of years of this program just kind of evolving and living and breathing. Now leaders are, the senior leaders are saying, well, even though we're saying a quarter, I'm going to say once a month I want my people out there. So they actually saw the benefit and they started just making their own decisions about how they wanted to even increase, right, that level of visibility in the field. Because when we resurveyed, 2 years after we implemented the program, that was no longer a blip on the radar. Employees, that feedback wasn't there. It was more about it was more about recognition, but that was in COVID times. So, of course, we had some, challenges during COVID to actually have recognition celebrations and things that we had kind of had to stop. So it shifted. And I don't see my supervisor, I don't see my manager out in the field was not even, not even a component of any type of feedback. So again, it kind of goes back to strategy, implementation, execution, measurement, and effectiveness of that execution results, right? And then you sort of keep doing that till you kind of address, right, everything that you can to just continue to drive. And again, it's not a silver bullet and it doesn't end, right? It's a journey and there's always continuous improvement that needs to happen. It doesn't start and stop.
No, not at all. And getting the ball rolling, from what I'm hearing, is probably the hardest part of this. Once you get that momentum going, and to your point, people can actually see the results that are coming from what you're implementing, then it almost is sort of like a flywheel in a way,
Yes,
where it can kind of keep on
it does.
building that momentum and
Absolutely.
earning that buy-in from everyone else. As so, I'm always curious. As a seasoned safety professional, you've had those conversations with leaders many, many times.
Hmm.
And like you mentioned, it's important to be able to kind of put things in perspective for them, whatever their position might be within the company. As a newer safety leader, for those people that are listening that might be new to the profession,
Hmm.
what advice would you have for starting those conversations with leadership? Because it's not easy, and it,
Hmm.
it can be a little bit daunting, I'd imagine, when you're first starting out. What advice would you have for those who are new to those conversations to really make it an easier process for everyone?
Yeah, I think it's around like just really trying to solve a problem. So, really identifying, it could be very low hanging fruit or it could be something that's a little bit more challenging, but trying to identify the thing that you're going to get people to rally behind. So, it may not be the most important thing, on your agenda from a safety perspective, but it may be something within the organization that is causing a lot of heartache or frustration. And being able to sort of kind of hitch your wagon to be able to solve something like that, to really kind of go back to gaining that credibility and trust. And so once you kind of have that, that reputation of, this person's really connected and they understand, right, that it's not always the big things, it's the little things. And really being able to help their peers or other leaders to solve some of their issues through the lens of safety, because, that's again why I love safety is it can solve operational performance issues. It can address a lot of things. When you have strong safety culture, it really does bleed into your overall operational execution. And so a leader coming into an organization, it's important to kind of identify, right, low effort, high return. So what are some of the things I can do, hit the ground running? Listening is very important. And having that curiosity mindset of just really kind of trying to identify, what are the things that I can go after. And then I think for me, the other really important piece is developing relationships. So safety is probably 90% influencing others without authority. And so, when you talk about influence, it's one of the topics I'm very passionate about. And it's really about being able to create relationships in the organization that are with people who are influencers, and to find your champions in the organization who have a voice at the higher level. So it may not be your direct boss, right? So if you report into the human resource director or you report into the, general counsel, there might be other people like a very strong human resource leader in the field who just, everybody listens to, and, it would be creating those relationships with that person to help them, or help them help you with your strategy. So, just influencing, creating relationships, pick and choose your battles to win the war. So,
Mm.
sometimes in safety, we try to solve everything, and we're very much want to be the safest organizations that ever went out of business, right? Like that's not the goal. The goal is to pick and choose your battles to win the war. And as you're doing that, you are building your credibility as a leader. You're building, right, the strategy, and demonstrating that you do approach things right with problem solving, and really being able to get to resolution. So I just say don't try to boil the ocean. Really find the small things that can, over time continue to build your leadership credibility.
Huh. So when you're working in an organization, it's less so about trying to kind of whip everyone into shape, right? And more so, you need to find out who are people actually listening to, and how can I talk to them and influence them to really make a difference in the safety program from the top down, I guess, in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples where you've really
Yes.
seen this kind of
Yeah.
change things? I'm sure many,
Yeah.
but are there any that stick
Yeah.
out in your mind that where this like really had an impact?
There's one story that I'm so proud of because it was recently, like I was a senior leader, right? But, we had a very strong culture in the organization I worked in, and they had a lot of traditional things that they did, in terms of core process. And so, one of the things I saw we would have these annual kickoffs, they called them. And these were, operations safety meetings to kick off the construction season. And people loved them, right? But they weren't very effective. Like we would bring everybody into a big room, we'd talk at them for a morning, we'd feed them breakfast, and then we'd say, okay, go to work. And it was all employees, frontline leaders, so you could have 100 people in the room. So again, a huge investment for the company, but no return. And so I, identified that we could do better here. But that was a very big cultural shift. And so, as I worked on developing, right, a more standardized approach, because again, also everybody wanted to do their own thing, And when you're kind of trying to implement change in safety, consistency, right, is important, and sustainability is important to build into your process. And so as I was preparing this, it was very different than what we've done. And I had a lot of reluctance from operations. And I had one particular senior leader who, kind of was on board, but not on board. I could tell, right? A little bit of pocket veto going on. And so I had to trust my process though. And I knew that I would, when they saw what it would be, that it would, they would see the difference and they would celebrate it. And so, we did it. They reluctantly did it. But then, come back to a board meeting. Both of us were in the board meeting, kind of giving an update. And he spoke very highly of this process and how it had really changed the approach on, how we were going to cement safety in our kickoffs and so forth, and was a huge advocate of the process. And so that's kind of an example of, having someone who, I had to try to influence, right? And I had others of his, peers who, saw it and understood it. But just kind of sticking with it and being a bit of a courageous leader sometimes when it's not the popular thing to do is important. And so that's kind of, I guess, an example of, just trying to influence. You got to be a little bit courageous in your leadership sometimes to break through.
Interesting. So that word courage is something that I can be thrown around, but it actually in practice is not easy to do. How do you build that muscle, I guess, to kind of speak out when you see something that isn't going right? And in the space of safety, especially under maybe high pressure situations where there's deadlines, there's all kinds of things that need to get across the finish line here. How do you really go out of your way while obviously keeping the business needs in mind, but taking those first steps? What tips and tricks would you have, especially for those newer safety leaders in the space?
Yeah, again, I think it really goes back to having relationships and a circle of trust with the people that you're working with. So really making sure that you create these relationships with individuals who, again, that will have your back, and then in larger forums, you I think you have more confidence then that you have people who see your vision and understand it and who will support you. But it also is experience a little bit. It comes, if I look back to at the beginning of my career when I was a young manager, right, there were days where it was difficult and, and things didn't always go right. But one of the biggest things I learned is there's no shame in failing forward. And it's really important because if you don't take those risks, then you're never going to get better. And so just, it's this concept of take the leap, have faith, and tomorrow's another day. But the more experience you become and the more credibility and, just respect you gain in your organization, the easier it gets because people do sort of give you a little bit more leeway in, kind of pleading your case or kind of understanding or being able to explain a little bit more about, why you're not in alignment with a decision. But it's also, again, it goes back to, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but pick and choose your battles to win the war. There are certain things that, I choose not to address because I know that the step change I'll get in that won't be as great as the thing that I'm going after. And so, you really have to kind of have a plan of when I walk out of that negotiation or that, place where I'm trying to influence, what is my bottom line? And I've got to then kind of stick to that and really kind of try to lead courageously through, my bottom line and be clear about what that is.
Right. So there's really a long-term vision that you have to have here, both in your career, giving people time to trust you, and then also with the results that you're trying to get to, right? The immediate sort of, maybe there's a small incident or whatever it might be,
Mm-hmm.
is what's it worth to me or to the organization versus the actual results that we could get if we really focus on what is truly important to the bottom line here. So
Yeah.
keeping those time horizons open in a way.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Be patient, right? You
be
have to be.
patient. It's not
Mhm.
easy though.
No, it's not, especially
It's,
when, people are expecting you to drive a change, right? And again, that curious mindset, and always look for innovative ways to do things, right? So if at first you don't succeed, try and try again. And and really always be, I always encourage everyone to be a constant learner. Always be out in the space, always develop your skill. And that also breeds credibility, right? So when you can bring ideas from outside in. It's very important. Where I'm working now is a space where I've never worked. I work in the transit industry. Well, I have a lot of fleet safety experience. I worked in the waste system. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to use that as my power, where I'm coming in with eyes wide open and I'm not influenced by what traditionally happens in our industry. And so that is a skill and a superpower that I have versus people who have 25 years experience in the business. And so as I've changed industries, I think every job change, I've actually changed industries. I kind of use that as my superpower, and I don't use it in terms of feeling like I don't have the experience, right, in the industry. So I don't have 25 years in the gas and utility industry. I don't have 25 years in waste management, but I have experience in different industries where I've seen different things work. And so that is a superpower for me because I can default to, well, I don't have the experience, so I can be a little bit vulnerable and call it out. I don't know what I don't know, but here's what I do know, and here's kind of how I've seen it applied elsewhere. And so I think sometimes people don't understand their superpowers, or think that because I don't have the experience, I shouldn't say anything. And I'm the opposite. I plead, innocent and say, I don't understand how this works, but this is kind of how I see we could, affect it.
it's such an important point, and from what I've seen, in different organizations, it really is. This is a cultural piece too, right? Whether an organization values the experience others bring, maybe not directly from their industry, but like you said, having a fresh set of eyes to a situation, or just the business needs, can be tremendously impactful, and you can spot things that others might not see right out of the gate, and bring things from your diverse experience there. So this episode is powered by BIS Safety Software, one of the leading safety and compliance software applications on the market today. The team at BIS has rolled out a powerful new reporting dashboard that makes it easy to track, measure, and interpret your safety performance. From monitoring near misses to calculating TRIF, you can turn everyday form data into meaningful insights, displayed through flexible charts, counters, and trends. With customizable widgets, advanced metrics, and permission-based access, it's a smarter way to stay informed and ahead. See everything they have to offer at bissafety.ca. That's
Yeah.
every single job move has been a different industry. That must have been a pretty large learning curve
I,
each time,
it,
hey?
it, it always is because there's cultural, right? There's industry cultural norms, that, exist. There's, organizational culture. There's operational practice. There's all of those things. But what I'll tell you is the playbook for safety doesn't change. And in all of these organizations where I've had the benefit and the opportunity to kind of being the first most senior person in the role. So, just they've never had a person at this level. And so I've had the benefit of really kind of being able to put my, kind of handprint on the strategy and the culture. So it's allowed me to, really look at the team I have, building the team that I need. So having those, industry experts, but also having, diversity on the team from an experience, from a, just their backgrounds, just really being able to build teams that are diverse, that allow us to have that. So I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. I just need to make sure that the smartest people are in the room. And that
Right.
And that is, that's important. And so a lot of, when you get into the higher levels of the organization in terms of running a department, like overseeing an entire safety risk management department, your skill sets have to change a little bit, right? You don't necessarily need to be 100% on the regs because you have somebody on your team that has that, right? So you then focus your learning more in innovation and what's new in the safety space, and how do I bring right what's new into this organization, and really focusing on that versus focusing on compliance. So as you grow and you level up in the organization, your skills need to evolve and you use them differently. So that's also an important piece when somebody, kind of makes that step from an entry level safety person to a manager, right? Like, what are the differences there? What's the difference to getting into more of a director role and overseeing a larger area or footprint? And then when you're really responsible for the entire strategy, what are the skills you need, to execute that? And it really, really evolves.
Right. It's never a constant. There's not one
No.
moment where it's all going to be the same. And I love that point about you have to make sure, right? You don't have to be the smartest in the room, but making sure that the smartest in the room is in that room to begin with
Yeah.
is huge, right? Something else that stood out to me, you mentioned earlier being a constant learner, right? And this
Mhm.
coming from somebody who has as much career experience as you do, is I love to hear that because it's so important, especially as I mean, think about the progressive, the learning curve, that how much more you will have learned if you every day you're thinking, okay, what can I take from today, right?
Mhm.
Versus somebody who might go through 15, 20, 30 years, whatever, but they'll kind of just coast along and don't really take advantage of the people or the knowledge that's around them. How much more, I mean, it's just like a snowball of knowledge that you're going to be able to, and experience that you're going to gain when you're really going out of your way to learn every day from what you can. Has that kind of been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a traditional safety person. I have a degree in criminology and I kind of learned, self-taught myself. I have accreditation in risk management. That was kind of something I did early on. And then I've just immersed myself in the industry, in, the professional associations. I've, hitched my wagon to every possible, opportunity to learn more, develop more, and just be very external in my networking, and that is one of the things I think that I see. What trips up most safety professionals is they stay in place, they stagnate, and they pull the same playbook out year over year and expect a different result. And they don't look outward, for their career, for their own development. They don't invest in themselves. And so for me, I'm really challenging my current team to say, okay, what are you doing, right, to make yourself a better leader? What are some of the things we need as an organization to help you with to gain more connectivity to what's going on in the safety space? Because when you just go to work every day and you work in this bubble, you're not doing yourself any favors and you're not doing the organization any favors because you're not innovating. And so I think you will see that's a differentiator between people who maybe get to a certain level in their career and because they are smart and they are effective, but they stay still, to then those who make that difference in terms of constantly trying to achieve that next layer and connecting and being networkers and just, self-developing, that constant learner. That's the difference between you sitting and staying at a director role or being able to get to the C-suite.
It's so true. Have building that networking muscle and going out of your way to really find, I guess, mentors as well would be
Yes.
a,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're starting out. Do you have any, because such an important piece here. Do you have any tips and tricks in particular that worked for you for finding those people early on in your career that could really offer that advice or give you those learnings that really made a difference? How do you go about finding? It's
Yeah.
so easy to, oh, I just network, right? No, well, what does that actually look like? For a lot of people, they don't even know where to start. So where would you recommend people kind of
Yeah,
go?
I think the easiest place is look where you work, right? So who are the people you admire and, and be able to identify some of those people. I was very lucky when I became a very young manager. I had a VP of risk who was my mentor, and he basically taught me the importance of metrics, measurements, right, in safety and security. And so, that was such an important foundational piece of my development. Was that I had a leader who was very, very, very savvy in that space. And that proved to be a very important part of my own development as a leader, to be able to create that business partnership and understand, right, all of those elements. So that was kind of like inside the organization. And then I also, definitely professional associations. So National Safety Council, American Society of Safety Professionals, Canadian Society of Safety Professionals. There are so many. There's so many conferences and stuff. And sometimes, right? Sometimes you personally have to invest because your employer may not want to invest for you. But those are, I think, important for you to self-invest. If your employer won't support you, now you should be advocating for yourself, because if you go and you learn, you bring that back and there is return on that investment. But really looking at, all of these organizations have working groups. They have development, training online that's free. There's a myriad of different, opportunities that you can enlist in. But for me, it was really being able to be part of like the Women's Council at National Safety Council, ASSP. I'm part of the Executive Safety Forum. So I'm creating these relationships with people who are helping me solve some of my organizational issues, and I'm helping them, right? So it's at every level. Even though I'm a very senior leader, I still look for mentors. I still look for those connections. But you have to really integrate yourself into the safety space. And then the other piece is industry associations. Industry associations typically have a safety committee as part of their association. So, if you're in a particular like utilities industry, or you're in, like in the transit space, APTA, they have a bus safety committee. So it's really trying to find within the industry, where are those safety, committees, and how can you become part, or at least be able to pull the learnings, because they post things. You can just, whether it's an individual or a resource, you can find ways for your own development.
There's so really there is a lot. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but I really like the first point you made, which is look around your current organization and what in your immediate surroundings, who in your immediate surroundings could really help you out, because there's probably somebody with a lot of experience just waiting to share it, but they
Yeah.
just haven't been asked, right? How much knowledge and experience isn't shared because we aren't asking to begin with, right?
Yeah,
I think
yeah, and
it's
and and
huge.
I think a really important part of that is that they don't have to be safety people to mentor you, right? Because a lot of like you can get a lot of safety knowledge, right, through your education, through online courses, but a lot of what it comes down to is really that leadership, mentorship, right? How to be an effective leader, how to communicate effectively, how to build the business case. And so those resources would be, readily available within your organization. I'm sure there are plenty of people that have those skills and do them well. So, just don't be too funneled in your, who you're looking for your mentor.
That's really interesting, and it kind of ties in with what you were saying earlier with finding people that outside of yourself that might have influence over others, right? It might not be directly in the safety space, right? But
Absolutely.
they might be able to, say something to another person, or they might be closer with others and people might
Mhm.
listen to them. There's so much here. Really, what I'm pulling from this is that you have to be a team player at the end of the day
Yes.
here.
Yes.
Fundamentally, safety is a team game, a team sport, right?
Absolutely.
Um, when it comes to, you know, starting out in your career versus now, you must have seen some amazing technological shifts and
Oh,
changes in
yes.
safety over that time, right? What have been some of the game changers, I guess, in the technology space that you've seen from when you started versus today?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much around personal safety. So just monitoring of the body mechanics and all of that technology, right? So you're solving your ergonomic issues has become a lot more, a lot more tools to help you do that. So just around that piece, it's huge. That didn't exist for me. Obviously the in-cab technology when we talk about fleet safety is huge. Just being able to really, where you used to not know what was going on behind the wheel of a vehicle to now being able to, help coach every driver real time. And make them more competent and make them more successful in their roles, right? It's not about discipline. It's about, being able to coach on the spot and being able to see those high risk behaviors and doing that. That, has such a fundamental impact on, not only the employee, the company, but the general public. So those are some of the things. What's most interesting me right now is AI and the ability for us to, mine our data or put multiple data sets together to tell a story to build insights. And so what would take our team, weeks to pile through, okay, well, I'm going to look at this system for training. I'm going to look at this system for our incidents. I'm going to look at this, all of these other, drive cam, all these other, systems, and I'm going to try to paint a picture of where our gaps are. We're working in our organization to funnel that all through, right? An AI agent that can then help us identify insights like this particular business is going to be at risk for this based on, right? Based on what we've seen past performance, or we've seen this trainer produce more employees who are having incidents in the first 6 months than any other trainer. Well, that gives us very actionable data to be proactive. And so, I think just information management and insights, and really being able to kind of tie all the technology together, uh, will help us become more effective and more efficient. So I don't have somebody sitting behind a desk trying to mine all this data before they go out to the field, right? They open up their laptop in an ideal world, they get their report for the day and say, oh, here's where I need to go, right? So that to me is, exciting and is really kind of the next level.
It's game changing. And you think, okay, well, how many more eyes are actually going to be out there on the field instead of
Yeah,
headfirst in papers and spreadsheets and
yeah,
analyzing the data, and maybe it's not even the right data that we're even
right.
supposed to be looking at here, right? To begin with, it's
Mhm.
incredibly exciting to see the changes, and it feels like every day there's
Yeah,
something new.
there is.
Wake up and it's like, oh, there's another thing here going on in the space.
Absolutely.
But that's definitely something I'm seeing that's common across industries, no matter what space they're in. Um, where, I guess, do you see the next kind of big thing in safety, right? So now we've got this data that's being collected together. Is there anything else that you see coming down the road that you're like, wow, this is really exciting?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's automation of everything, right? So when you take the human element out and you can engineer out, right, those kind of human performance factors, there's a lot to that, and I think that's kind of where the shift of the skill of the safety professional is going to become a much more technical. So today, right, where we're really dealing with human behaviors, in some industries, we're going to be, looking at machine learning and all of these other aspects of understanding what are the risks associated with this automation, whether it's vehicles, driverless cars and things like that. And then how do they interact with, right, the human element. And we're seeing that again, of course, already in warehouses and things with, automated forklifts and all of those things. But I think it's going to become more and more. And so I think when we look at like what is the curriculum in our universities and, what are the skills of a safety professional even 10 years ago, they're going to be completely changed. And so I think as a profession, we really have to start thinking about how we're going to prepare that next generation of safety professionals and what are the competencies that they're going to need to be more more able, right, to affect change and implement. If I think about, some of the people even on my team, I'm like, they struggle with technology, and that just simply won't, that'll be the price of admission, I think, as a safety professional, is having a really strong technical acumen.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking back to what you said about leveraging those human relationships too, right? You can have a robot talk all day about safety and the analysis and the data and all this, but if there's no, just the way humans work, if there's nobody that they trust to actually connect and make it real for them,
Yeah.
and what they're doing, then it's not going to stick, I would imagine, right? So
Yes.
I'm thinking there's probably got to be a human aspect to this that's really gonna be at play as well, even more so maybe than there was kind of, in the past. Do you see that possibly happening as well?
Yeah, and I see that today. I see people kind of like defer to technology versus sometimes taking, like you see it just in general business, like they write an email versus picking up the phone. So I can see that becoming more and more of an issue, right? Where people are basically, taking the path of least resistance and deferring, right, to technology versus maybe those human interactions. But, I do think there'll always be a need, for um, that personal kind of element, and that is definitely, I think, a risk.
100%. When it comes to metrics and the data that we are looking at, obviously AI, incredibly exciting for its potential here. Are there any indicators that you've seen that are really exciting for their ability to kind of, piece out what we should be looking at versus not? And then maybe if you have one on the flip side that is, uh, I don't want to say overrated, but one that might be overutilized in a way,
Hmm.
or over relied on, because I think those exist as well. If you've got any examples that kind of stick out to you.
Yeah, I think for me, what's interesting is being able to see being able to see behaviors before, obviously before they become, right, an event, and so that predictive analytics. So obviously being in the fleet space with drivers, really being able, like right now, technology is a G-force event, right? Then triggers a clip. We look at it. We coach the driver. And now the technology is evolving, so now we can see those precursors to those events, right, before they happen, or how many times was their following distance. And that technology exists today in our cars and stuff, but we don't get the data behind it, right? So now that we can kind of see how many times a day, as an example, does an operator driver go through a rolling stop, right? And is it at a particular stop sign? In a neighborhood. And so then it's like, well, what's going on there? And so that's kind of more the human, like physically going out or getting a drone, perhaps to monitor the area. But those are the elements I think that give us like that extra, kind of ability to be more proactive in identifying issues before they become issues or events before they become events. So for me, like the whole, machine vision, AI component is, I think, going to be, yeah, hugely beneficial to us. On the flip side, from a KPI perspective, right? I do think that, and this is something I think as a country and as a general profession, that we have to really start to remove the focus on the lagging indicators like total recordable incident rate, preventable vehicle accident rate. Those things are what happens to us. And if you're strictly driving your focus based on reducing those numbers and not looking at all those inputs, then you're missing the boat. And that's kind of now should be safety 101. But there's still a tremendous amount of government, agencies that focus on those lagging indicators. And so we really culturally need to shift that and start having employers, really being accountable to focus on, the actions, the activities, things we're doing on the prevention side, so that the lagging indicators kind of take care of themselves. And that's, I think, a big shift. And that's, culturally, it's a struggle for, I think, any safety professional going into a company that only has lagging indicators, right? And that's what they hang their hat on. And if
There's a
we,
lot of them.
is it the absence of accidents or the presence of safety, right? So it's really shifting that. And that's one that I think we really need to like move past. And we're, today in our organization, we're looking at, how do we measure engagement of our leadership, right? And how that over time impacts lagging indicators. And so the more engaged and the more, the more inputs to safety that we have, we do see that translation into the lagging indicators, but we also see the maturity of the culture. And so when we talk about the perception survey and all those other things, right, that's measuring your culture, we're seeing that, be more of the indicator of sustainable change versus we put a program in place, we reduced our preventable vehicle accidents this week, we forgot about it next week, and now we're back to where we were. And
Right. Right.
that's where, we really need to be beyond that. But there's unfortunately still a number of organizations that, you know, still focus on that.
There's an inherent sort of weakness to all the lagging indicators, to your point, right? Which is what's already happened to us, and this is something that I am hearing about. We need to transition to there's much better ways to the leading indicators and all different ways, like you talked about,
Yeah,
with monitoring, right? The rolling stops, great example, but it probably will take time
absolutely.
to make that shift, but it's exciting that people are talking about it because
Oh,
that's how
yes.
it's actually going to happen, right? Is if nobody's actually discussing these things, it's
Mhm.
not going to get the ball rolling. Um, you mentioned earlier that you have people that you look up to in safety and you look for mentors right now. Are there any people, right, individuals in the safety space that come to mind that you look up to or you go to for advice when you need help yourself on maybe a tough organizational issue or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest influencers, early in my career, and he continues to be, is Tom Kraus. And he he wrote this book called Leading with Safety. And that was really for me the foundation of kind of how I maybe took a different approach to how I was going to be that safety leader. And so he really talked about safety leadership competencies, and he really kind of defined it in such an easy way for anyone to really kind of understand. When I talk about the working interface, those are the words that, he penned in that book around how everything comes together. So for me, he's been a really big influence kind of in how I approach, safety and sort of my strategies. Definitely. And then I've had peers, that I've worked with. I have Dr. Megan Tranter, who, is an individual that her and I worked together at PepsiCo, and we really worked together to try to change, kind of change, how safety was led in that organization, and had some foundational impacts. And so, her and I are still very close in terms of, staying connected in the field. So I have a lot of peers over time that have, helped me solve problems, or, just be that voice of reason sometimes. So, I think it's important it doesn't have to be, someone who's so, up there from a learning and a professional perspective. There are a lot of great safety leaders and organizations that I think, I continue to, talk to. Like, I have peers from the waste industry that we maybe talk every week, and we may be in different industries now, but we are still trying to solve the same problems. And so that's, there's just a number of people that I've met and curated a list of people through my career that to this day, whether we worked together 15 years ago, we still have a very, very close connection.
And that is the benefit of how, over a longer career, if you build and maintain these connections, you can,
Hmm.
have a full contact book of people that you can reach out to when you might need. I love that you mentioned Tom as well. We had him on the show.
Yeah.
Phenomenal individual. He's got so much insight and fascinating experience too,
Hmm. Hmm.
to speak with. My last question for you, Nicole, if you could go back it's the first day you're starting out in safety, the very first day. If you could give one piece of advice to that individual who's just starting out, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great, oh God, there's so many. But I think it's about be confident in yourself and courageous. I can't say that enough. And be okay to fail. It's those things. If you can succeed in those things, then everything else will fall in place. But I think you have to be confident. You have to come through as confident in your abilities and your knowledge. You have to be courageous to really kind of pick the things that are important to you and stand by them. And then, if at first you don't succeed, keep trying.
I love it. It's so true, and it makes sense for not only the safety space, but I think so many different. Really, it's applicable anywhere, right?
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
that's yeah, it's massive. Um, Thank you so much, Nicole, for taking the time to speak with me today. There's a lot of really great insights here that I'm sure not only myself but the audience as well will be thinking about for quite a while here. Where can people find your work, what you're up to, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I am very active on LinkedIn, so definitely encourage you to connect with me. I love meeting new people. I'm very actively involved in the American Society of Safety Professionals, so you'll usually see me at the conference or involved in working groups there. But definitely reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always building my network, so definitely would love to continue the conversation with anyone who would like that.
I love it. Absolutely. And we'll include the link to your LinkedIn as well down below in the video description here. Once again, Nicole, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. It was great to speak with you today. I appreciate it.